In a world built on trust, what happens when that trust is shattered? Welcome to my web of lies, where every secret and betrayal twist the truth beyond recognition. Are you ready to uncover my hidden truths? I never thought I would find myself here, teetering on the edge of a decision that could shatter the life I built. My name is Evelyn Carter, a 37-year-old woman who has spent the last 15 years crafting a marriage that, for all appearances, was stable and strong. I had a loving husband, 2 beautiful children, and a home that held the warmth of 1,000 memories. Yet, within that comfort, a quiet restlessness simmered beneath the surface, unnoticed and unexplored, until Aaron Hayes moved into the house next door 6 months ago. A man in his early 40s, he carried himself with an effortless confidence that made him hard to ignore. He was friendly but reserved, always greeting my family with a polite nod or a charming smile. At first, he was just another neighbor, a face in the backdrop of my suburban life. But then, small moments began to accumulate, and before I knew it, Aaron had become more than a passing acquaintance. It started innocently enough. Our conversations were brief, casual exchanges about the weather or neighborhood news. But there was an undercurrent to them, an awareness that neither of us acknowledged but both of us felt. It was in the way his gaze lingered a second too long, how his voice dipped just enough to make my breath hitch. I told myself it was harmless, that I was imagining things, but deep down I knew better. Perhaps it was the way he listened, really listened, when I spoke, a quality that had long faded in my marriage. Or maybe it was the way he made me feel seen, as though I were more than just a mother, a wife, a woman tethered to responsibilities. With Aaron, there was no history, no baggage, only the present moment, charged with something I dared not name. I tried to push it away, rationalizing my attraction as nothing more than fleeting curiosity. But the more I denied it, the stronger it became. I found myself looking for excuses to see him, lingering by the mailbox a little longer, hoping to run into him. The guilt gnawed at me, but so did the thrill. Then came the night that changed everything. A storm had knocked out the power, and my husband was away on a business trip. Aaron, ever the gentleman, came over to check on us. It was just a neighborly gesture, yet as we stood in the dim candlelight of my living room, the air between us grew thick with unspoken words. His presence was intoxicating, his proximity a test of my self-control. I knew then that I was playing with fire. One step closer, one moment of weakness, and everything I held dear could crumble. But even as I wrestled with my conscience, part of me longed to let go, to taste the forbidden. This is the story of how I almost lost myself, and how I found the strength to walk away. The first time I noticed the shift within myself, it was barely a whisper in the back of my mind. I was standing in my kitchen, watching the coffee drip slowly into the pot, when I felt it, a strange, inexplicable anticipation. My hands tightened around the ceramic mug, and I shook my head as if to physically dislodge the thought. It wasn't dissatisfaction with my marriage, not exactly. Andrew, my husband, was a good man, reliable, kind, devoted. But devotion had turned into a routine, and routine into monotony. Conversations revolved around logistics, the kids' school schedules, grocery lists, and weekend plans. Passion had been replaced by comfort, and somewhere along the way, I had lost the spark of being desired. Then Aaron moved in. I remember the first time I truly saw him. He was in his driveway, unloading boxes from the back of a truck, his shirt damp with sweat. He had an easy, relaxed demeanor, the kind that suggested he was utterly at home in his own skin. When he caught me staring, he didn't look away. Instead, he offered a slow, knowing smile, one that made something inside me stir. I told myself it was nothing, a fleeting appreciation of an attractive man. But the weeks that followed proved otherwise. I started noticing him everywhere, mowing his lawn, walking his dog, jogging past my house in the early mornings. Each time, our eyes met, and an invisible thread seemed to tighten between us. He would wave, and I would smile, the exchange innocent yet charged. It was ridiculous, really. I was a grown woman, a wife, a mother. And yet, in those brief encounters, I felt something I hadn't in years seen. It was a slow burn, this attraction, a gradual awakening to a part of myself I had long buried beneath duty and obligation. And as much as I wanted to ignore it, to pretend it didn't exist, I couldn't deny that something had shifted. And deep down I knew this was only the beginning. Aaron was unlike any man I had ever met. There was something about the way he carried himself, unapologetically confident yet never arrogant. He had a quiet strength, a presence that filled the space around him without effort. Our interactions grew more frequent. It started with simple conversations at the mailbox, polite nods that turned into brief exchanges about the weather, books, or our shared love of coffee. But soon those moments stretched longer. I found myself drawn to his voice, his laughter, and the way he leaned in just enough to make my pulse quicken. One afternoon, as I stepped outside to grab the mail, Aaron was already there, leaning casually against his car. "Hey, Evelyn," he greeted, his voice smooth and warm. I smiled, my fingers tightening around the envelope in my hand. "Hey, Aaron, how's your day?" He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Busy but better now." My breath caught, and for a moment I couldn't look away. There it was again, that electric current, undeniable and dangerous. And yet I didn't move. The tension between us grew in ways both subtle and undeniable. It was in the way Aaron's eyes would seek mine across the yard, in the accidental brushes of our hands when exchanging mail, in the brief, knowing smiles shared between conversations that lasted just a second too long. I told myself it was nothing, just harmless glances, but the way my pulse quickened each time I saw him told me otherwise. One evening, as I stood on my porch watching the sunset, Aaron stepped outside, his gaze meeting mine instantly. He raised a glass of wine in silent acknowledgement, and I felt my breath hitch. I lifted my own glass in response, a quiet toast to a connection we both felt but dared not name. It was inevitable that we would cross the line, if only for a moment. The air between us had thickened with each passing interaction, every glance and smile layering unspoken words upon unspoken words. And then one day the moment came. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when I found myself standing too close to Aaron. We had both reached for the same package mistakenly delivered to his doorstep instead of mine. Our fingers brushed, just a fleeting contact, but it sent a jolt up my spine. I pulled back quickly, my breath catching, but he didn't step away. "Sorry," I murmured, my voice barely above a whisper. Aaron smiled, but there was something unreadable in his eyes. "No need to apologize." I should have moved and turned away, but I didn't. The warmth of his presence was magnetic, and for a brief second, I wondered what it would feel like if that touch had lasted longer. My heart pounded as I stepped back at last, the rational part of me screaming at the reckless emotions bubbling beneath the surface. Aaron and I had established an unspoken rhythm, a pattern of accidental meetings that were, in truth, anything but accidental. Late at night, when the neighborhood quieted and the weight of the day settled over me, I would find myself outside, drawn to the fresh air like a moth to a flame. More often than not, he was there too. Our conversations deepened in these hushed moments, shifting from casual pleasantries to something more personal. He spoke of his past, of the marriage that had unraveled, of the loneliness that clung to him despite his composed exterior. I listened enraptured, recognizing in him the same ache that I had long ignored within myself. "You ever feel like you're living a life that's not yours?" he asked one night, his voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated before answering, the truth lodged in my throat. Sometimes. His eyes searched mine, understanding flickering between us. The distance between us shrank, and for the first time, I felt truly vulnerable in his presence. It was dangerous, this connection, but I couldn't bring myself to sever it. I hadn't meant for it to happen. The words were never supposed to leave my lips, but they did, slipping out like a secret finally too heavy to bear. It was another late night, the sky cloaked in darkness, the world around us fast asleep. Aaron and I stood outside, the soft glow of the street lamp casting long shadows. The silence between us was charged, neither of us daring to address what had been building for weeks. "I think about you too much," I confessed, my voice barely above a whisper, my hands trembling at my sides. I hadn't planned on saying it, but the moment had swallowed my restraint. His expression shifted, surprise flickering in his eyes before something deeper took its place. "Evelyn." I turned away, wrapping my arms around myself, as if I could contain the whirlwind inside me. "I don't know what's wrong with me. I have a good husband, a beautiful family. I shouldn't. You're human, he interrupted gently. And maybe you feel like something's missing. I inhaled sharply, his words striking a nerve I hadn't wanted to acknowledge. Was I missing something? Or was I just selfish? Aaron took a step closer, his presence overwhelming. I think about you too, Evelyn. More than I should. The air between us crackled with unspoken longing. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to run, to stop this before it spiraled further. And yet, I remained frozen, caught in the pull of something I couldn't name. He held my shoulders and turned me around till I was facing him. His scent hit my nose. Aaron tilted his head and kissed me. I kissed him back and tasted his tongue and lips. It tasted like strawberries and something else. The kiss deepened. He held me in his hands and caressed me deeply and gently. It had been so long since I had felt like this. I held on to him as he started to explore my body. He touched me in places I had forgotten existed. In seconds our clothes had come off, and we were intimate. He was also deep inside me. A part of my brain fed off the thrill and excitement of what was happening. It was the most exciting thing that had happened to me in a long time. His strokes were strong and intense. After he poured out on my belly, a wave of guilt washed over me as I remembered I was a wife and mother. We can't do this, I whispered more to myself than him. I felt so guilty. I know, he said, and for the first time, I heard the same struggle in his voice. But that doesn't change the way it feels. A lump formed in my throat. This wasn't just a passing infatuation. It was something deeper, something dangerous. And the more we tried to resist, the harder it became. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched, thick with everything we wanted to say but couldn't. Finally, I took a step back, forcing distance between us. "Good night, Aaron," I murmured, retreating toward my house before I lost what little control I had left and ruined everything I had built. As I closed the door behind me, my heart pounded in my chest. I had crossed a line, even if only in words. And now there was no turning back. The next morning, I awoke with the weight of my confession still pressing against my chest. Sleep had been restless, filled with fragmented dreams that left me feeling even more uncertain. The rain outside mirrored my mood, a steady, relentless downpour that blurred the world beyond my window. I needed air, clarity, something to remind me of who I was before Aaron Hayes became a temptation I could no longer ignore. Without a second thought, I stepped outside, the cold raindrops soaking through my thin sweater as I walked aimlessly down the quiet street. I hadn't expected to see him, yet there he was, standing at the edge of his porch, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his eyes fixed on me. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The rain dripped from his dark hair, tracing lines down his face, and I wondered if he was struggling as much as I was. "Evelyn." His voice was barely audible over the rain, but it carried enough weight to stop me in my tracks. I shook my head, forcing my voice to remain steady. "We can't do this anymore, Aaron." A flicker of something, regret perhaps, crossed his face. "I know." We stood there, separated by more than just the rain. The silence between us stretched, filled with all the things we would never say. He took a step forward, and for a moment I thought, hoped, feared, that he might reach for me. But then just as quickly he stopped himself, clenching his jaw. "You should go inside," he said, his voice thick with something unspoken. "Before we do something we can't take back." I hesitated. The storm within me raged just as fiercely as the one around us. But in that moment I knew, this had to end. There was no future in this, only destruction waiting to unravel everything I held dear. With a deep breath, I turned and walked away. Each step felt heavier than the last. But as I reached my front door and stepped inside, I felt something else too, relief. I had been on the edge of temptation for too long, teetering dangerously close to a fall I might never recover from. And now finally I had stepped back. Aaron Hayes would remain a memory, a lesson in restraint, a reminder of the life I had chosen, and the love I refused to betray. As the rain continued to fall, I closed the door on him, and on the part of me that had almost given in. The next day, the skies opened up, drenching the world in an unforgiving downpour. It felt strangely appropriate, as if the universe itself was cleansing the weight of my thoughts. I needed to clear my head, so I stepped outside, letting the sun soak into my face and clothes. washing away the remnants of last night's confession. I hadn't expected to see him, but there he was, standing beneath his porch awning, watching me with that same unreadable expression. And just like that, the chapter of Aaron Hayes in my life was closed. If you've been captivated by the truth beneath the betrayal, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more secrets untold. Share your thoughts or your own story in the comments. Let's keep the conversation going. Until next time, remember, trust is fragile, and so is the web we weave.